The sun was beginning to sink behind the distant hills, casting long, golden streaks over the narrow streets of the small town. The air carried the faint aroma of freshly baked bread from the corner bakery and the distant hum of evening prayers. She had been walking for what felt like hours, her feet aching and her thoughts wandering in circles. The day had been heavier than usual, small disappointments piling over each other, the kind that make a person feel invisible even in a crowded street. By the time she reached the quiet little café tucked between a florist and a tailor's shop, her shoulders were sore, and her mind was clouded with the usual restless questions about life, about where she belonged, about the choices that had led her here. The café was modest, with chipped wooden tables and a few mismatched chairs, but there was a charm in its simplicity. The warm glow of hanging lanterns reflected off the faded posters on the wall, and a soft hum of a radio played a melody she vaguely recognized. She stepped inside, hesitating for a moment as if the decision to enter required courage she didn't know she had. The scent of spiced tea and fried pastries filled her senses, grounding her in the moment. There were only a few patrons scattered around, an elderly man scribbling in a notebook, a young mother trying to calm a squirming child, and then, in a corner near the window, a young man sitting alone. He was quiet, almost entirely absorbed in the book in front of him. A small plate of food sat beside him, the aroma of simmering curry mingling with the faint scent of his cologne, a mixture of sandalwood and something faintly sweet. He looked calm, almost untouchable, yet there was a softness in the curve of his jaw, the subtle flicker of his eyes as they scanned the page. She hesitated at the edge of the café, unsure if she should approach. Her heart was unusually loud, a rapid drumming that made her acutely aware of the smallness of the space between them. "Can I sit here?" she asked finally, her voice barely louder than a whisper, though to her ears it sounded bold. He looked up, startled for only a moment, before a slow, amused smile curved his lips. "Only if you eat too," he said, his voice calm but carrying a teasing warmth, as if he had been waiting for someone to challenge the stillness around him. There was something in the simplicity of his words that made her pause. It was not a question, not a command, but an invitation. She glanced at the empty chair opposite him, the plate of food tempting her in a way that went beyond hunger. She hesitated, weighing the strange comfort of the moment against her natural reserve, then nodded. "I'll eat," she said softly, almost as if she were promising herself as much as him. He gestured to the chair, and she slipped into it, careful not to disturb the small stack of books beside him. He went back to his meal, but now there was an unspoken companionship between them, a quiet acknowledgement that neither was entirely alone anymore. She ordered a cup of tea, the aroma swirling between them like an invisible thread, delicate but undeniable. As she took her first sip, she caught his eyes watching her, curious, cautious, yet not intrusive. It was the kind of look that invited conversation but did not demand it. And so, without speaking, without forcing the silence into words, they shared the space, the warmth of tea, the comfort of food, the gentle hum of the evening outside the window. For the first time that day, she felt a small easing inside her chest, a quiet hope that sometimes, the simplest gestures, a seat at a table, an invitation to eat, could quietly begin to change everything. The clinking of spoons against ceramic plates was the only sound that punctuated the gentle murmur of the café. She took another sip of her tea, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers and slowly into her chest. The young man, sitting across from her, was quietly observing her, though not in a way that felt intrusive. There was a softness in his gaze, a subtle curiosity that invited her to speak without pressure. She cleared her throat, a little self-conscious, and said, "It's a quiet place, isn't it?" He smiled faintly, pushing the book slightly to the side. "Yes, it is. Sometimes quiet is the only place to hear your own thoughts." She nodded, feeling an unexpected relief. His words were simple, but they carried weight, as if he understood the restlessness she carried, the endless chatter of doubts and worries that often left her feeling hollow. Encouraged, she asked, "Do you come here often?" "Not really," he admitted, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "I prefer quiet corners, but it's rare to find someone else who wants to sit quietly without forcing conversation." His eyes flicked up to meet hers, and there was a trace of amusement there, a hint that he found her presence unexpectedly welcome. She smiled, a little awkwardly, but it felt genuine. "I guess I came here today because I needed a pause. Everything's been moving too fast." He nodded, understanding more than she expected. Life has a way of moving fast, whether we want it or not. Sometimes, sitting down and just eating, or drinking, or reading, is the only way to remind ourselves that it's okay to breathe. For a moment, the two of them simply sat, letting silence settle between them. But it wasn't uncomfortable silence, it was shared, like a gentle agreement that they could exist in the same space without having to fill every moment with words. She watched him take a bite of his food, his movements unhurried, deliberate, as if he were savoring more than just the taste. And she realized that, in that small, ordinary act, there was a kind of serenity she had been missing for a long time. Curiosity nudged her forward. "What are you reading?" she asked. He glanced down at the book and shrugged lightly. "Just something old. I like stories that remind me people aren't so different from each other, even if their lives seem worlds apart." "That's comforting," she said softly. "Sometimes I feel like everyone else is moving forward while I'm stuck in the same place." He tilted his head slightly, studying her expression. "Maybe we all feel that way sometimes. But maybe it's not about moving forward all the time. Maybe it's about noticing the small things while we're waiting for bigger moments to happen." His words lingered with her, soft and persistent, like a gentle wind stirring dust in a quiet room. She found herself opening up without intending to, telling him about her recent struggles at work, the way she often felt unseen, the tiny victories that felt meaningless when no one noticed. He listened, nodding occasionally, never interrupting, his presence steady and calm. "And you?" she asked finally, curiosity overcoming her hesitation. "What brings you here, really?" He smiled, but there was a trace of sadness in it, a vulnerability he didn't hide. "I guess, I come here because it's one of the few places I can exist without pretense. I've had my share of disappointments. Sometimes, it's easier to sit with a plate of food and a book than to explain yourself to the world every day." Her heart tightened at the honesty in his words. There was no pretense, no attempt to impress or hide. It was raw, human, and she felt an unexpected connection forming, fragile but undeniable. A small accident broke the moment. She reached for her tea, and her hand knocked slightly against the sugar bowl, spilling some onto the table. He chuckled softly, quickly, grabbing a napkin. "Don't worry," he said, his voice gentle. "Messes are just proof that life is happening." She laughed, a little embarrassed, and he smiled warmly. It was the kind of smile that could make the corners of the world seem softer, as if small kindnesses had the power to change the weight of the day. For the first time in a long while, she felt comfortable. Not the loud, brash comfort of laughter with friends, but the quiet, steady comfort of someone who truly sees you and doesn't rush to judge or fill the silence. The café seemed smaller, cozier, the evening air warmer, and she realized that sometimes, the simplest acts, sharing food, exchanging words, even sitting quietly together, could quietly begin to stitch together a fragile thread of trust, hope, and maybe, just maybe, something more.